Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. When we look out here over the next 10 days or so, the first thing your probably eyes going to get attracted to is the fact that there's going to be a stretch right in here in parts of the southeast toward the mid-Atlantic that's going to be quite dry. All the action is going to start off in the northwest. It's going to cut through the mountains, and then it's going to be sitting here in the central part of the United States, hammering an area, especially this part of the mid-south that's been extremely wet for a while. With the drier conditions we're expecting over most of the next 7 to 10 days, it's also going to be quite mild. And you can see here the temperatures compared to average, it is going to feel like we're deep through spring, almost starting to get close to some summer type temperatures here. Now, that's early summer, not the warmth we can typically get like in July and August. But you can see here the pattern is set up such that we're going to be under a pretty dominant ridge. And the reason for that starts way out here across the open Pacific. We have an extended and very long. Look at that. That is the Pacific jet stream. Very zonal, very west to east. And this is finally the consequence or the results of that shifting around of the MJO. The MJO has been spending a lot of time in this area. So the transport of the energy, the heat, the momentum out of the tropics is really just extending the jet in that direction. So what we're going to ask is, how long does that last? What are the near-term and long-term implications? And as you know, I like to get to the long-term first. So what I'm watching here is the position and flow of the jet stream as we work our way into the beginning of March. Means that the coldest air is going to stay to the northeast through the beginning of the week. And this ridge building into the middle part of the country opens up into the southeast. See that by the time we get to next weekend. Now that ridge is a pretty tough barrier to get through. And what ends up happening is the pattern gets a bit blocked up. You see it's highly amplified like this. And therefore, we end up getting the benefit of that ridge for much of the next 7 to 10 days, keeping us mild and dry. Now, eventually, with time, as you get out there past March 7th, so we're talking about the 8th, 9th, and 10th, the models have been very consistent, both the GFS and the European, at sweeping that trough into a deeper position anchored over the Hudson Bay. So what ends up happening is when we get out there into week 2, this dry pattern we're enjoying now is going to just go over very wet. And we can see that when you look out there for the entire month of March into early April, the model's been quite consistent with delivering the much above average precipitation into this part of the Tennessee and Kentucky. And with each of these systems kind of ejecting in this direction, we start to see a better precipitation signal going forward. There's a couple other things to take note about this pattern. The model's been consistent with allowing drier conditions in parts of the southern plains. I would back the dryness up more into this area than I would keeping this region dry. I think we're going to see better precipitation here. So I'm just thinking about the cotton belt, thinking about this southern part of the corn and soybean belt, and of course all the other crops we grow there. We do notice that from California to the southwest, the likelihood of increasing precipitation there is limited as well, because we have yet to see a really well-defined subtropical jet stream pattern developing. Now, what about the temperatures on this? We know that March is going to start very mild, but if you just take note of this is looking out there at a 30-day window. That colder air will advance at times into the mid-Atlantic, into the Carolinas. So you're going to get a great start, but I think that the middle of the month, that second week and beyond, is going to be volatile with respect to temperatures, and expect to see the moisture starting to return. Now, I've been thinking about this, and so I went out and I said, whoops, let's go back up there and show you that. I said, how long or how much of the next few months is really going to look like what you see here? And I just want to point this out. This comes from the CPC, and they're going to update this very soon. They update it usually at the very end of the month, so we might even get an update of this later today. But you notice they have you over on the milder side of things as well. I think we're going to see more mild days this spring than we are going to see more colder days. But because of that extended Pacific jet, because of the La Nina, I think we're going to be seeing a volatile temperature pattern. So we need to watch this carefully for when that last frost is going to be around and what this is going to mean for our soil temperatures going forward. On the moisture side of it, again, I would agree with this, but I could expand it farther and farther here to the east. And I want to explain to you why. See, right now we do have our La Nina. We've talked a lot about this, right? And this La Nina lately had a little push again. It kind of comes out, as the La Nina finishes, it does have these time periods where it kind of has a bit of a resurgence. We still have the cooler water here. We call this the negative phase of the PDO, and quite a bit of warm water in the Atlantic. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because this morning I went back and I reconstructed for the state of North Carolina the April and May precipitation totals going back to 1895. I detrended since 1970. So, looking since 1970, we've actually been getting a little bit wetter in spring, April and May. But the volatility is huge, as you can see here. So what I then did was I ranked all of these by the wettest to driest, and I plucked off all the wet years since about 1970. And I produced a few composite maps. So now, if we're going to see the pattern going over into a wet April and May, here's the keys. Listen carefully. Troughs in the Bering Sea, ridges right here to the south of it. That gets the jet stream, as you just saw, screaming across this area. What ends up happening in this pattern is it tends to dive here in the Midwest and run up over some sort of a ridge that sits, between Bermuda and the Bahamas. So the flow comes around like this, and that sets us up to be very wet. Now, what are some of the other clues that could help us understand if this is going to be the case? That's your key. Watch the Bering Sea. Well, here's one of the clues, ocean temperatures. April to May, these are the years that were wet, see them down here. We tend to have cooler water still sitting in this area, but the resurgence, or the rebuilding, I should say, of a La Nina. We tend to be very mild right over the Gulf Stream. But the signals here in the North Pacific aren't as strong. So what I'm saying by this is that I wouldn't necessarily say that the La Nina is our greatest key in figuring out where this pattern's going to go. I think it's going to come down to the MJO behavior, and this is what I mean. When you look back at those Aprils to Mays that were very wet, the MJO didn't spend a lot of time in the Pacific. It spent time right here in phases 4 and 5, and a lot of time just off of Africa. That is phase 1. So basically phase 1, 2, 3, see how they go across the ocean here? 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So more often than not, we need to see a reset into the Indian Ocean. That gives us that extended Pacific jet that then really cranks up right here and sets us up with a different pattern. So that's what I want you to watch with me. Let's see if the MJO spends more time in the Indian Ocean. That would signal a wet spring. All right. Now, in the meantime, let's go from there to here. This is how things have shaped up lately. So this particular map, what it's showing you here is the precipitation ranks by climate district for February. And North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, we've been split, right? If you're up in the high country here in the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, it's been very wet. And on the other side here in the Mid-South through the Ohio River Valley and the Northeast, extremely wet. But we've been very dry along the coast. So I believe that this is going to be remedied later in March. Not in the near term, but later in March. I also want you to take note of this large sector here of the Western Corn Belt that's having record dryness. And we're going to help relieve some of the dryness that we've seen here in the Pacific Northwest and Northern California going forward. But that's just a good perspective on the nation we need to take a look at here. As you saw, the temperatures are going to change over. Now, we've been more mild in the southeast than the rest of the country. But this is going to go over very mild to begin March. But as I said, expect possibly the end of the second week into the third week of March to go back over to a colder signal. Now, putting this all together, and again, we come back to this precipitation, I'd like to show you the current soil moisture values down to 40 centimeters. This is in percent. You can see, look at this drier stretch here close to the coast compared to more in the interior, like in the Mid-South where it's been extremely wet. And as I said, look at the Western Corn Belt here getting into the southern plains. Very, very dry. And that, of course, is where we've seen the drought expand. Now, as we think about this pattern in the near term, let's talk about this by looking at the high-res European model. All right, I'm going to play this quickly because not a whole lot's going on here. I'm all the way out to Thursday into Friday. And what you just saw was there'll be a few clippers. There'll be a coastal low that comes out of Florida and goes this direction, and a whole lot of nothing in between. But I stopped this on Friday night to Saturday morning because those deeper troughs that cut into the west, the first one's ejecting here. And by Saturday, once we get into Saturday afternoon and evening, it's going to open up a large sector where we're going to see some strong to severe storms in this area. There'll be ice north. And look at the snow on the backside. And that snow is going to hit some areas that have been very, very much deprived of snow. But for North Carolina, we're still waiting. So going to Saturday into Sunday, high pressure. See this big high pressure cell here? That's protecting us, keeping us away from the moisture. It's all here. So even the system on Sunday comes out and rips through parts of the Mid-South again, and we don't see much adding up here. So let's just take you out through that next week. I just want to show you how the precipitation accumulates. Let's look at the whole of the East Coast. I can do this fast. That's 10 days. There we go, real fast. Mid-South, 2 to 4 inches of rain. Gulf Coast, 1 to 3. North Carolina, very little precipitation to speak about. Same thing for Virginia and most of South Carolina. That means we have to wait until we get past about the 8th or 9th before things start to pick up. And we mentioned this, right? We saw that once you get out there to the 10th, 11th, 12th, look at how deep the trough becomes. The ridge, see where it is? It was here. Now it's there. So the net effect of that is, doesn't matter which model you look at, the second week of March, the 7th through the 14th, improved chances on precipitation. This is the ECMWF. That's the GFS ensemble. So we're looking at a drier next 7 to 8, 9, 10 days, somewhere in that range. And then the pattern progresses east. So all that, the mild air, my goodness, let me show you how mild this is going to be. This is your coldest day right here. Watch. This is Monday into Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Now, you can see that the Central Plains on Wednesday may be cracking 80 in Kansas, but we're back up in the 70s here. We hang on the longest. Thursday, Friday, that's one cool day, but then you're going to see here Saturday into Sunday back over to warm. Now, how long does that last? Well, if we look out there day 5 through 10, this is the region that keeps the warmest air around the longest. Day 10 through 15, it's still there. But as I said, I need you to be watching this much later in the month, like mid-month, fully into mid-month, for the changeover to some cooler weather and a much more active pattern. All right, that gets both our long-term out of the way, our near-term out of the way here. Let's go talk about South America and wrap this one up. Over the next 15 days, the driest places are going to be over here. This is the state of Goiás and Minas Gerais. Now, this is an area that up until this point had been extremely wet. So the drier conditions here are going to help them with soybean harvest, finishing the safrinha planting. Mato Grosso, big producing state right here in the middle of the country, that's going to have just decent weather. There's nothing to talk about here that's going to be anything but just normal and I think good for crops. Southern Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina. We saw flooding over the weekend here. We see that over the next 10 days, we're still looking at somewhere between 150 and 250% of normal precip. Now, just a reminder, it was Paraguay, Uruguay, Southern Brazil, and Argentina that were in major drought for much of the last 2.5, 3 months. So this has been a pretty sizable pattern flip. But overall, when you look at what's going on in South America, what I say is that the damage was done, and this pattern is favorable in the bigger picture of things. So we'll leave it there. I'll talk to you again next Monday. Hey, next Monday we will have all new long-range forecast data from the Europeans. So I'll be excited to share with you what that looks like, and we'll get to it then. Thanks.